Welcome to this explainer. So, recently, the US celebrated its 250th birthday. Amidst all those fireworks, the massive drone shows, and the historic milestones of liberty, there was this quiet, almost invisible paradox hanging right over the festivities. We were out there toasting to 2.5 centuries of physical independence, right? But nearly every single citizen raising a glass did so while inextricably bound to a hyper-centralized, totally invisible digital empire. We're celebrating freedom while basically unknowingly serving a brand new kind of monarch. Seriously, right now, I want you to literally look down at your hand. Look at the device you're holding or the screen you're sitting in front of. If you're tuning into this, you are plugged into a lattice of systemic reliance that runs so incredibly deep, we barely even notice it's there anymore. 250 years after throwing off the yoke of a distant monarch, we've kind of willingly colonized ourselves under these new tech empires. We've essentially traded physical colonization for digital colonization.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because as we step into this post-semi-quincentennial era, try saying that 3 times fast, we have to ask a pretty uncomfortable question. How dependent are we really? When we actually sit down and audit the tech stacks of our modern existence, we find a truly terrifying reality. We've built this entire civilization where we outsource our very survival to just a handful of fragile layers. And the harsh truth, we own absolutely nothing.
Here's the blueprint for this explainer. We'll start with the illusion of independence, then look at the fragile infrastructure, move on to cloud landlords, dive into colonizing the mind, and finally wrap up with Web4, the sovereign internet.
All right, part 1, the illusion of independence. You see, our loud, super vibrant celebrations of physical liberty often completely mask the reality of our digital captivity. The core issue we're dealing with here is what's called systemic reliance. Think about it. We've outsourced global commerce, global logistics, and honestly, even human psychology to these incredibly fragile centralized systems. If this hidden system so much as ripples, society just freezes. We really like to think of ourselves as these empowered digital citizens, but when you look closely at the structure of the web today, we're actually more like tech serfs, toiling away on land we don't even own. Let's move to part 2 and see how this builds. The fragile infrastructure. This whole systemic reliance, it's built on a totally invisible foundation, open source software. This is the stuff that runs everything from our corporate banking systems to our smart power grids, and we treat it like air or water, right? Just this natural, totally free resource. But the 2026 State of Open Source report reveals this unprecedented existential crisis. 55% of organizations now cite avoiding vendor lock-in as their primary reason for choosing open source. That is a massive 68% surge year over year. Companies are desperately fleeing big tech's proprietary walls. But here's the catch. As they rush into the arms of open source, they are completely abandoning the unpaid, exhausted human maintainers who actually build and sustain this vital resource. Now, what's really interesting here is the story behind this absolutely staggering number, 50 billion. That's the estimated number of devices worldwide running a critical global project called curl. Well, in early 2026, this foundational project had to take some drastic defensive measures, including actually shutting down parts of their bug bounty programs. Why? Because they were literally being buried under a mountain of hallucinated AI-generated security reports. The rise of AI coding assistants didn't just flood code bases with auto-generated dependencies, it actually weaponized the open source review process against its own maintainers. Crazy, right? And that has led to a chaotic explosion of third-party dependencies. 60% of large enterprise engineering teams admit they spend at least half their time simply keeping existing systems alive through routine maintenance and bug fixes rather than, actually innovating. We've essentially built this towering digital skyscraper on a foundation of digital toothpicks. And who's holding it up? A shrinking pool of completely exhausted, unpaid human beings. Which brings us to part 3, platform landlords. And this brilliantly illustrates the shift. If open source software is the dirt foundation, big tech is basically the massive company town built squarely on top of it. Back on the old web, we bought software. We hosted our own files. It was ours. On the new web, we merely rent access. We pay this perpetual, never-ending subscription fee just to store our own lives on someone else's servers. We've traded the absolute security of digital ownership for the temporary, fleeting convenience of renting our lives from corporate landlords. Think about how we've consolidated literally
everything into three dominant cloud ecosystems: Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud. If just one of these giants experiences a systemic regional outage, the global economy goes dark. Small businesses lose their storefronts, hospitals lose access to medical records, and massive logistics networks just lose their fleets. But wait, it's not just infrastructure, it is identity. Think about clicking sign in with Google or Apple. By surrendering our digital citizenship to private corporations, if a rogue algorithm flags your account tomorrow, boom. Your entire digital existence, emails, family photos, business docs, is instantly erased into an automated black hole. And good luck finding human customer service to save you.
Moving on to part 4, colonizing the mind. Now, as terrifying as that technical fragility is, there's another layer. The internet has become an environment that is radically re-engineering human consciousness itself. 210 million. That's the estimated number of people globally who now suffer from severe internet and social media addiction. And among our youth, it is a constant, unyielding tether. 46% of adolescents aged 13 to 17 report being online almost constantly. But perhaps the most frightening stat of all, 10 minutes. Over half of all teenagers check their smartphone notifications within 10 minutes of waking up. Literally, before their eyes even adjust to the morning light, their brains are embedded directly into the algorithmic outrage machine.
So, the crucial point is exactly what behavioral health specialist Dr. Panlawet Pasuan notes here. The average screen time isn't actually the primary clinical concern. It's that 1 in 10 users whose behavior has crossed the line from habitual straight into compulsive. This psychological dependency is directly linked to a 25% increase in depression risks. We've completely offloaded our memory to search engines and our spatial orientation to GPS. Our attention spans are sliced up, packaged, and sold on real-time ad bidding markets. If the grid goes down today, we aren't just inconvenienced, we are paralyzed.
Let's pivot to part 5, Web4, the sovereign internet.
If the past 250 years have taught us anything at all, it's that true liberty absolutely cannot exist without ownership. To understand how we escape being tech serfs, we have to look at where we've been. Web 1, it was decentralized but static. We just read it. Then Web 2 became interactive but deeply centralized. We wrote on it, sure, but big tech owned the chalkboard. Web 3 promised to fix this whole mess, but let's be totally honest, it largely devolved into hyper-financialized casinos and tokenized speculation, rather than building resilient, everyday infrastructure. Which brings us inevitably to the absolute necessity of Web 4, the sovereign internet. At the very heart of Web 4 is solving what we call the consumer dilemma. Think about it. If you're merely a consumer, you are inherently trapped. You're completely dependent on the landlord's rent hikes and the platform's constantly shifting algorithms. But the owner prerogative? That changes the whole game. If you're an owner, you dictate your own terms of engagement. You possess independent, total control over both your infrastructure and your data.
So how do we actually emancipate ourselves? Well, it rests on 4 tangible pillars. First, a local-first architecture. Second, sovereign personal AI. Third, prioritizing protocol over platform. And fourth, utilizing a mutualized infrastructure. Let's break down exactly what this actually looks like in your daily life.
In practice, Web 4 ownership means your software runs locally on your own hardware first, and then it syncs peer-to-peer. The cloud, that's just an optional backup, meaning if your internet completely cuts out, your apps still work flawlessly offline. And instead of renting an AI from some monopoly that logs every single one of your thoughts, you have a user-owned, open-weights AI running right on your edge hardware that answers only to you. We replace those centralized platforms with portable cryptographic keys, meaning you actually own your identity, and you can seamlessly port your entire digital life anywhere you want. And finally, infrastructure is mutualized across democratized micronodes globally. We're sharing computing power without relying on those massive, incredibly fragile server farms. Look, dependency is undeniably comfortable. It is so incredibly easy to just open an app, blindly click accept on the terms of service, and let a black box algorithm dictate your day. But that comfort, it costs us our agency, our privacy, and our resilience. The fight for independence didn't end back in 1776. It just shifted venues. The new frontier of liberty is written in code, it's hosted on servers, and it's being fought for right now in the quiet spaces of our own attention spans. So I leave you with this one final thought. Are you going to keep renting your life, or is it time to take back the stack and finally become an owner?